Hi, I'm Doug Ross, editorial page editor at The Times, here for an endorsement interview with our editorial board. We're today interviewing two of the candidates for state auditor. We have John Schick, who's a Libertarian candidate, and Mike Claytor, a Democratic candidate. Also in the room with us are Bob Heiss, editor. We have Chris White, publisher. We have Krista Zavanovic, our assistant managing editor for news, and of course Brian Vernellis doing the video. You'll see his credit at the end. We should probably talk with you both about what's your vision for the office. John, let's begin with you.
Well, I guess the goals that I have for the auditor position would be to continue working on transparency. If we get on the webpage for Indiana government, there's a transparency portal, has a lot of information, and I'm not complaining at all about that. There's actually a lot of really good information that's already available, but of course I've been reviewing it a lot as a candidate, and can see some opportunities to improve the amount of information and the kinds of information that's available through the transparency portal. There's other aspects of running the auditor's office, showing variances from the budget. There's a lot of accounts having to do with that are both set up originally as a budget and then the actual disbursements and spending against those budgets. A lot of that information is available, but variances between what was budgeted and the actual spending aren't always explained as well as they could be. And then I view the role of the office as just being there to provide really good information to the General Assembly and to the governor so that they can make fact-based decisions over spending and other political initiatives that they have. I think too often decisions get made based on emotional appeals or the aspirations of the politicians involved and those kinds of things. And I think the auditor's office is in a unique position to really provide the information, the data and the facts so that the cost-benefit analysis of those kinds of decisions can be more thoroughly evaluated and to help the General Assembly and the governor make those kinds of decisions. So that's what I see, is just continuous improvement on some things that are already really good around transparency, and I don't see the role of auditor as having a lot of discretion. The policy and decisions are made by the General Assembly and the governor. I view the auditor really as kind of the workhorse of the state government as far as I'm concerned. When I look at the roles and responsibilities of that office, it's got much to do with just keeping accounts, recommending improvements to the management of funds, things like that, but not really affecting policy, at least in any direct way.
Okay, Mike?
Sure. I think the sort of day one activity of being state auditor is to try to put the word audit back into the auditor's office. The state of Indiana, if you looked at it as you would look at a corporation, it processes $30.5 billion of transactions a year. And if you rank that on the Fortune 500 list, the state of Indiana would rank number 101. And if you look at where we are with 101, would we want a professional performing that service, or would we want a politician performing that service? I think is one of the issues. But the other issue there is every large corporation, in fact all 500 of the Fortune 500, have an internal audit function. The Auditor of State does not have an internal audit function. Originally it was set up to audit the accounts as they came across. There were some changes made in 1909 where there was another agency created with the auditor's office, and then in 1945 that agency was split out. That's called the State Board of Accounts, which I used to be the deputy director of. That particular agency, when those audit functions were moved away from the state auditor's office, the state auditor began a process where it was doing less and less auditing. Till right now, they're really a paper-pushing entity. It's a very clerical, ministerial function where paper comes in from various state agencies. That paper is matched to make sure that The contract and the purchase order look the same, and then payments made. But while that then is posted into the records, there is no audit function there to say that was the right account, that was the right amount, those things should or should not have been processed or paid in that way. The most glaring example is an account that was in the state auditor's office, the cash was in the treasurer's office, and the state didn't know that they had $500 million that was sitting there. It's a very simple process that if you tag your accounts to say that at the end of every month, clearing account should be 0, not 320 million or 525 million. That's a very, very simple process that the auditor's office did not have. And while we have gone through 5 state auditors in the last year with 2 actings and 3 actual state auditors, none of them have recommended any changes that would prevent losing that kind of money. And the 525 was what made the paper, but if you look at the State Board of Accounts reports over the last couple years, there have been additional amounts, not huge amounts. Well, there are huge amounts if you looked at my checkbook, but there have been several instances of 5 or 4, 2 or 3, and 1 of 7 million that the state just didn't know it was in an account or it was in the wrong place. And while there are controls in state agencies to handle that, there's no control in the state auditor's office to handle that. The state auditor should be more than just the just the check writer for that function. So that's sort of day one. I certainly agree, transparency portal needs some work. It's tremendous information if you understand how state government works. If you don't understand state government jargon, it's a little hard to maneuver around in. So it needs a lot simpler instructions, could be a little more current, but as he said, the amount of data that the auditor's office has is amazing. And the public should be able to get to that easier so that they understand how that functions.
Okay. I think that begs a response from you.
Which part of that?
To what Mike's ideas are for audits and within the department and so forth.
No, I really have no. I think he's right. I think that's as I said, when I was talking about the variances, being able to explain variances between what was budgeted and what was actually spent, having the audit controls in place to recognize those kinds of things. Once again, I fully admit I'm not from an insider to the state government at all. My experience is all working with private sector companies, but I think we just have 2 different ways of saying the same thing. That we're both looking for ways to recognize when money's sitting in accounts that shouldn't be there, or has been spent that wasn't budgeted, or those kinds of things. And I'm not saying that there's a big problem with that in the state of Indiana. As I was scanning through there, clearly there's room for improvement. You see accounts where a lot of times you'll see movement of funds between funds. That it'll say, this amount of money, some number of millions of dollars was loaned from another fund, or repaid to another fund, and those kinds of things. So, the recognition of those kinds of movements, and trying to work with the agencies that are spending the money to do better planning in the future, asking them, where did we drop the ball on the planning such that we're not spending what was budgeted? And that's more of the continuous improvement that could be going on, is recognizing variances and documenting how agencies could do things differently in the future to minimize those variances.
I wonder about your backgrounds and what brings you to the race and why you're the best person for this job. Maybe Mike, give us a little
Sure.
bit about your background. And
Absolutely. The born in a log cabin I built myself kind of stuff and all those good things. I really started out when I got out of school, which was in '74. I got a job with the Indiana State Board of Accounts. And my position there was as a field examiner, one of the auditors in the Board of Accounts. Did various things in that position, but one of the first jobs that I did with the Board of Accounts was a financial improvement project in the state auditor's office. So at the time, the financial reporting for the state's annual report was cash basis. And governmental accounting standards, or governmental auditing and accounting, were both changing at that time. There was a big national push to change things. So I helped set up the first accrual set of financial reports for the state of Indiana. And that was when Mary Akins Curry was auditor, which is a long time ago. But I was at the State Board of Accounts for 15 years, did various engagements throughout the state of Indiana. I was I don't know history of everybody in the room, but those that remember when the state took over Calumet Township, I was part of that crew that worked on that engagement through the State Board of Accounts. I was deputy director at the time, but worked on that as well up here. Various kinds of projects, again, all through the state. So it's something that I have that experience with state government itself, as far as the budget and the auditing and the state auditor's comptrollership type function. And then I went with a CPA firm, which at the time was called Crowe Chiswick. It's now called Crowe Horvath. Basically Indiana-based CPA firm. Started out in South Bend, but I was in the Indianapolis office. Actually worked in various offices of Crowe, really throughout the country. But in almost all instances, I was working for state and local governments, doing efficiency work, audit work, and a lot of economic development consulting for those entities. So a lot of bond issue work with various counties, cities, places around the state. I think if I go back and look, I think I can come up with 3 or 4 different times I did an income tax study for the Lake County Council that they never adopted. And now that I'm no longer doing that, they finally adopted it. So I don't know if that's them or me. But that's been basically a 40-year career of working with government, mostly in Indiana, but certainly in a lot of other places as well. And I retired from the CPA firm and looking at what is it that's next, and really seeing that I felt there was a lot of improvement needed in the state auditor's office, and just decided that would be where I would want to place my expertise.
Okay, John?
Well, my background is I moved to Indiana just out of college, went to work for one of the steel companies here in Northwest Indiana. Worked my way up through in the IT department, was essentially running the data center and help desk services for one of the large steel companies here. And then in 1997, I went to work for another consulting company, management consulting company. And what we do is work very similar to what the state auditor does, which is we look through accounts of spending. It's more of a bottom-up assessment of what companies are spending their money on, look for opportunities to improve those services, evaluate the relative value of the services that they might be providing in-house versus outsourced services. So benchmarking, contractual benchmarking of service providers. And I mean, Mike mentioned how with a $30 billion budget at the state, and the reason that 60 popped into my head is because when you also include all of the spending by all the counties, there's another $30 billion there, which the auditor doesn't directly affect, but has some oversight to. If you're talking $60 billion, those are really large companies, but those are exactly the kind of companies that I've been doing management consulting with now for 17 years. The clients that we have are global or large national companies that have lots and lots of IT and computers, and they're wondering about the value of their IT services. So my job is I don't run the company, but I'm an employee of the company that goes in and does those kinds of assessments. So I view it as very similar. As I was trolling through the accounts and the disbursements and the budgets for the state, it all even though it is it's a government setup, still very similar to general ledgers that you would see in a private sector corporation, and the budgets that you would see there as well. So I think that the work that I've been doing for a long time in the private sector is has given me a lot of experience around the kinds of things that I was talking about earlier, recognizing variances, planning for continuous improvement, making recommendations how the corporations, or in this case the state, could continually improve those operations to reduce variances and provide better planning numbers for the decision makers.
We should take this moment to point out that your Republican opponent, Suzanne Crouch, chose not to meet with us today, so she'll be in for a separate interview. She hasn't been in office that long, but what do you think of her performance?
Either one, or you?
Mike, let's begin with you.
Sure, why not? It's been kind of quiet. I think part of the issue, she's doing the same things that a candidate does. She's running around the state. I go to Jefferson Jackson dinners, she goes to Lincoln dinners and county fairs, and we're doing all that. One of the issues that I have with a lot of elected officials, and not calling her out in any way, is for the most part, elected officials get elected to an office and then they hire somebody to actually do the job. And if you look at the duties of the auditor's office, some are very ministerial, but some, such as producing the comprehensive annual financial report, that is an extremely sophisticated activity that I've actually done for states and for local units of government. It's something that, if you think about an SEC traded company, they file their annual report every year with the SEC. In fact, the state files its annual report with the SEC, and that's required to be done every year. And it's an extremely sophisticated report with a lot of details, and there has never been a person elected state auditor of either party who, one, was a CPA, and two, would actually know how to prepare that report. And what I intend to do is, day one, not be a figurehead in an office, but to actually run the office, actually perform services, and do the things that are necessary to get the job done.
Okay. John?
I just know about Suzanne from what I read in the papers, and she hasn't been in the job for a very long time, or made any had time to really affect the way the auditor's office is run that much. There are a couple things that I completely agree with her positions on. The focus on trying to support the growth of small businesses in Indiana, and maintaining the reserve funds, right? Indiana has quite a large reserve of cash right now, which, and once again, it's up to the policymakers and decision makers to know if that's, the value of maintaining that is really the best thing, as opposed to some other things that they could use those funds for. But I know there have been years when Indiana didn't have any reserve, that were, threatened with raising taxes and those kinds of things. And I would much rather have some buffer, some cushion, so that we didn't have to ask taxpayers to, divvy up and bail out the programs that are in place, but when the times are bad. So so both of those things I completely applaud. The governor and the General Assembly for being able to have a reserve fund in place, and Suzanne's position on trying to build awareness that to reduce the unemployment rates here in Indiana, we really need to help the growth of small businesses, which is where most of the new jobs come from. I know recently here in Indiana, the unemployment rates have come down some. There was an article in the Northwest Indiana Times just a day or two ago talking about that. But I think we all, and the data that I've seen and what our suspicions are is that Some of that reduction in unemployment rate is people who have given up looking for jobs, and the average salary of people that are finding jobs are not replacing the salaries that we lost when the recession came along in 2008, right? So I think to help the state the most, we need to, the best thing that we could do as a state is to promote small businesses, which are going to be a key driver in reducing unemployment.
And how do you see the auditor's office doing that?
I don't. I'm responding to something I saw Suzanne promoting
Okay.
in one of her interviews. I saw it in the news, and so I'm just saying I completely support that. But the auditor's office doesn't have any direct influence on that.
Okay.
Can I comment on
Sure.
that? There's a few issues there. One is the state surplus, which has grown to $2 billion and is there. The lowest it's been in the last 20 years is $850 million. So there has been no time in recent memory where the surplus has been down to where a tax increase is necessary. The $2 billion was put there on the backs of reducing programs. The state legislature has passed a requirement, not a requirement, but a target that the total reserves should be about 7% of revenues. And right now they're operating at 12% of revenues, which is 5% higher than the marker. In certain years, if that percentage gets to a certain point, it kicks in an automatic taxpayer refund. So we've done things like not pay $100 million of subsidies to adoptive parents of special needs children so that we can have that $2 billion in the bank when it may kick out a refund to taxpayers that's going to look real good politically, but it doesn't look real good to the adoptive parents of special needs kids who, while the governor has decided to pay them this year, they've not been paid in prior years. And all that does is build that surplus. On the small business issue, where they talk about helping small businesses, if you look at the trends that have been put in our statute for income taxes, the individual income tax is being reduced over a 3-year period. The corporate income tax is being reduced over a 10-year period. And when you get to the end of those periods, the corporate tax rate will still be 1.5% higher than the individual tax rate, but corporations do not pay local income tax. They only pay the state income tax. So while you have 1.5% income tax in Lake County, there are counties that have a 3.5% income tax. And what will happen in that instance is individuals will be paying a higher tax rate than corporations. Then let's look a step further. Most small businesses that are formed are either sub-S corporations or they're limited liability companies. Those companies pay their taxes on individual income tax returns, not on corporate tax returns. So when we get to the full-out policy of the state of Indiana on how to handle small businesses, we are going to be taxing them at a higher rate than corporations. So when the state brags about what it's doing for small business, it's doing a lot for big business. It's not doing much at all for small business. So and John acknowledged that they bragged about what they've done for small business, I think that's totally a smokescreen because they are on a policy drive to hurt small business.
We should probably talk about the State Budget Committee. What do you see as the auditor's role, John?
Well, the auditor's role is laid out in the Indiana Code, and it's to keep track of all accounts and funds. And so the State Budget Committee sets up I guess I'm not sure what your question is. I mean, they have different roles. What's your question about the State Budget Committee?
Well, what do you see as a member of that committee? What do you see? How do you see the auditor's role?
Well, the auditor's role is to execute according to the budget. I'm not sure I'm sorry if I'm misinterpreting your question.
Well, one of the things that certainly is, been big in the news recently, in recent years, was the creation of the Center for Excellence and Career Innovation, and which many say is kind of a shadow Department of Education, and that was not in the budget, but approved by the Budget Committee. So, so I'm curious, as auditor, what would your...
We may be confusing the Budget Committee and the State Board of Finance.
I'm sorry, State Board of Finance. My mistake. So if you'd speak to that.
Well, once again, that would certainly be one of the things, anything that was not authorized by the General Assembly and signed by the governor would have to be identified as a variance that would need and if the approvals weren't coming from the people who were constitutionally assigned to make those kinds of spending decisions, the role of the auditor is to make sure that that is brought to the right people, and if there's inappropriate approvals for that kind of money, you'd have to take corrective action, right? I mean, there's different ways the auditor can go about. You don't want to think about going to filing lawsuits and things like that, but that's ultimately what they'd have to do is have a court test to see if it constitutionally if that money should have been approved or not. Okay, I mean, I'm a libertarian, so I'm really interested in sticking with the Constitution and the Indiana Code, and shenanigans to avoid following those rules are something that the auditor clearly should be in charge of identifying and trying to correct.
Okay, Mike?
Really, the issue and what you can do is pretty much as John's saying. The auditor has a bully pulpit where they can point out what's going on. As you were referring to the CC, which was created by executive order of the governor and then funded by moving money from other agencies. The vehicle for moving money is the State Board of Finance, which is the governor, auditor, and treasurer. And if you analogize it to local government, I think it makes more sense to people where, the city council passes a budget and then you had a really nasty winter, so you have to do more potholes than you thought you were going to have to. So the council comes back in and amends the budget. And at the state level, you really don't have that opportunity to pull 150 legislators back in to amend the budget. So the State Board of Finance can amend the budget at any time. They can't exceed the total of the budget, but they can move any dollar from any state agency to any other state agency. So they have pretty absolute power over budget amendments, and that's the kind of vehicle you would use, if a governor wants to set up the CC or any other agency that they would want to create and move FSSA into various functions or any other state agency they would choose to do. The auditor has one vote in making those decisions, but the auditor certainly has that bully pulpit that has that information that's not getting out there. In government, when you do a budget versus actual statement, the budget that's reported is the amended budget, is the way the financials are reported. So you don't ever, in the normal financial report, you don't ever say, here's what the legislature passed, here's what we amended, here's what we spent. You just say, here's what we amended, here's what we spent. And you can make those numbers look a little better that way. So I think the auditor has that opportunity to, really use the public ear to say that here were changes made in the budget you may not know about. And they may impact Glenda Ritz, they may impact Department of Labor or whatever entity it may be. But, again, the auditor only has one vote there, so it's bully pulpit. But right now, that's all one-party control at this point. It's like the legislature is supermajority on both sides. The Board of Finance is one party. So you really have that entity or those entities able to make all those decisions. And you need somebody to start blowing a whistle and saying, there's a foul over here. And just pointing out that things are being done. you don't block it, you're not an obstructionist, that's not the role. But the role is giving the public information so that they can make that decision of whether that was the right policy to pursue.
In Indiana, you study state government when you're in fourth grade, which is long before you're eligible to vote. So in the time between you get to the ballot and say, we elect a state auditor, how do you respond to the people that really don't understand what the agency is, what the office is, and what the department does? John,
so if somebody wanted a quick education on the role of the auditor, I would begin by talking about how the purpose of the state constitution, which does not describe the role of the auditor fully, but it does refer to the Indiana Code, where the role of the auditor is clearly laid out, all the duties and responsibilities of that office. And then I could run through with them and describe some of those duties in terms of maintaining accounts between the Indiana state government and other government agencies, the federal government, other states, the keeping of accounts, paying warrants, or maintaining essentially the checkbook for the state and keeping a list of all the payments. That would be how I would begin a quick education of what the role of the auditor is. And then, as I said earlier, I view that the role of the auditor is not one that exercises a lot of discretion over changes in policy, trying to maneuver around the will of the General Assembly and the governor. That really it's to provide all the information to make sure that everybody can see when those kinds of things are happening. As Mike just talked about, if money's being approved inappropriately or in a way that doesn't have firm legal grounds or constitutional grounds, then that would be the role of the auditor to recognize and to maintain the credibility of the state government.
Okay, Mike?
Yeah, there have been a few states that have at least changed some terminology to maybe help the voters out a little bit. Florida, several years ago, changed their chief financial officer position to an elected chief financial officer. And that individual is called the state CFO, which is really the function of our state auditor, to really be the state CFO. I think that would actually help people, because the state auditor's office and the state treasurer's office, treasurer you can kind of understand pretty easily that that's where the money's residing, but auditor is not a term that's well understood by anybody but bean counters, and bean counters are pretty boring people. So I think that would help if we could really explain to people that it's the CFO. It's really the financial watchdog, the person that's there guarding the hen house, I guess that would be, and being able to maintain that function so that people really know what's going on. But I do think it's really difficult in this cycle with the three state offices that are up. I'm not sure anyone really understands what any of those three offices really do. So it's a real matter of education for whoever's running for Secretary of State, Auditor of State, Treasurer of State, to really explain that. To really, you have to know who's on what group. The treasurer runs the college savings plan. No one knows that. The auditor's on the pension board. I don't think anyone knows that. But it's the state employees right now are horribly concerned about the pension board, but have no idea the auditor's a part of that. So it's been a real education issue, and typically no one pays attention to that office unless you lose a whole bunch of money. Then they'll pay attention.
Well, how important is it to have, you mentioned the Board of Finance has all this power. How important is it to, have them all on the same board, or have different political parties represented? What do you see that Mike?
Sure. This is my first time running for office, but I've been around politics since I started with the State Board of Accounts. But in the experiences that I've had, I worked a lot with Governor O'Bannon, worked a lot with Governor Kernan, and at the time, the auditor and treasurer in those offices were both the opposite party of the governor. And it was a matter of if the governor needed to move money for a program, if a new federal grant was coming, for example, and so you had to have matching money, and you had to take that matching money from somewhere, you couldn't just say, let's do this. You had to meet with the auditor, meet with the treasurer, explain why that's happening, and then the transfer could be made. We've gotten so far away from that in this last session of the General Assembly, one of the very few Democrat amendments that actually got through the General Assembly was a requirement that the State Board of Finance explain why it's making transfers. And now they're required by law within 30 days of making a transfer to explain why they did it. And this is the first time in 198 years that's been part of the statute that they had to explain it. And Republicans and Democrats both had to vote for that bill to make it happen. And it's because that board does not have transparency. And I think that board works better the more transparency it has. And if there's one or two opposite party people on that board, I think that helps, one, with getting that word compromise back into the vocabulary, but it also helps with transparency.
Right. And that goes back to what I said, as I was looking through the numbers. Of course, I'm not a government insider. Everything I know is what I find out through the transparency portal that they've set up. But yeah, I was seeing these transfer payments in there all the time without a lot of explanation about what was going on. And clearly, I see that as something the auditor could bring much more light to. And not that I want to, create. I don't want to disparage the way that they've been doing things too much, but with everybody on the same party, as Mike mentioned, when you've got the majority in the legislature and the auditor, it creates some doubt about, are some of the things being allowed to slip through because they're all playing on the same team, or could an auditor play a more active role in slowing down some of those transfers?
Okay.
I wonder about the campaign. Are there debates scheduled? Will you be on the same stage as your Republican opponent, or are there any events that you will be able to discuss that collectively?
None that I'm aware of.
Run into our opponent at county fair here and there. We have received one debate invitation that I understand was declined. So we would love to debate, love to appear together, but I don't feel at this point that it's probably going to happen.
And when you ran into her at the county fair, did you buy her a fried Snickers bar? Or
I
anything
didn't.
Like that?
No,
Oh, man.
I actually when you've been around forever, you know people. When I did the financing for the Vandenberg County jail bonds years ago, and at the time Suzanne was the county auditor, so I worked with her on that project. So it's not like we're complete strangers, that we've actually worked together in the past. So I have nothing against Suzanne. I don't throw rocks. I want to throw information instead. I've got nothing against her or Tim Barry and I have been friends for probably 30 years. While he was auditor, I knew him when he was treasurer in Allen County. I only met Dwayne Sawyer once, and he wasn't in the office very long. But I don't think there's any bad feelings or anything there. So I'd love to debate anybody. So John and I'd be happy to debate each other, but I don't know if our opponent's
Right.
going to jump into that.
Yep.
Fair enough. Okay, any other questions? Is there something we didn't ask that we should have?
I've been running around having a good time. The one question that I think is the only bit of dirt that the other side has been able to throw at me is that for a short period of time, the CPA firm that I was with transferred me to Florida, and I was a Florida resident for 5 years and voted in Florida, Florida driver license, the whole 9 yards. So they have been out there saying that I am not a Hoosier, although I spent 57 of my 62 years in Indiana. So I'm at least arguing percentage-wise that it works. But I honestly was surprised you didn't ask me that question because they have been blogging about it and putting it out there, and I just think it's kind of crazy.
Okay, John?
Well, just one other thing that I thought I'd mention, something I did some research into as I was looking through finances was even though the state auditor does not have any direct influence over county budgets, I just wanted to point out, there is, I think the auditor does have some discretion to lay out guidelines around things like we've been talking about, transparency, and how much information should be available about county spending. The counties spend a lot of money. Here, Lake County has a $2.6 billion budget for revenues and disbursements, and Porter County, where I'm from, is $1 billion. So, there's a lot of money flying around there. And when you look through their accounts, and I want to say this is a vast improvement over the last time that I dug into these numbers when I was running for county council and county commissioner in Porter County. But when I look through these accounts, I see that, of course, when I look at all the counties, out of $30 billion that's being spent in the counties, and the accounts they're using, more than half of that invariably winds up being in other disbursements. That they're not being very specific about what kind of spending should they expect in the coming year. It always winds up going into this other category. And when you dig into the details of, well, what kind of spending is under other, the biggest category there is other disbursements as a subcategory of other disbursements. While I love the amount of transparency that Indiana has over the spending, I think there's improvement opportunities for the counties also to do better budgeting, and not have everything go into the other category all the time. And I think the state auditor could offer some support, advice, guidelines to help that. So that's just the last comment I had. That's one more area I think we could help.
Okay.
Just one thing, John, in spirit of full disclosure, and since we had to address this with Mike, have you ever left the state of Indiana for any reason?
I grew up in Michigan, and when I got out of college, I came to Indiana right out of college, and I've been here ever since. I got an MBA from Indiana University, and so I have 3 sons who all live and work in the state of Indiana. So I feel very much a Hoosier. I was not born and raised here, but I've been here ever since college.
And that question was asked to you by a Sooner, so.
Okay.
We're all here now.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you for viewing.